I used to think war only reshaped the land, not the very rules of reality. But Hiroshima changed that. We braced ourselves for fire, for ruin, for death delivered in a single heartbeat. But no one warned us about what would follow. The silence that came after wasn't peace. It was something conscious, dense, pressing in on you, like the city itself had lungs and was holding its breath. When our orders came down, my squad was already frayed at the seams. Young men pretending endurance could replace rest, trying to convince ourselves we were still fighting a war that had an enemy we could see. What we found there didn't fit into any briefing, any manual, any prayer. Streets stripped bare of sound. Human shapes fused into walls like shadows caught in emotion. People turned to vapor in the instant between one heartbeat and the next. We told ourselves it was science, radiation, blast pressure, shockwave, because we needed something rational to hang our sanity on. But deep down, every one of us felt that explanation slide off like water on glass. The city breathed wrong. Too many nights one of us would jolt awake, swearing someone was whispering in the rubble, only to find nothing but moonlight and ash. Too many moments when you felt watched, but the street behind you stayed empty. One evening, when the sun sank behind the shattered horizon, the ruins glowed a bruised orange. The air smelled of metal and rain that would never come. I thought I heard church bells faint in the distance. Impossible, since no churches stood anymore. Daniels froze beside me, his rifle half raised. "You hear that?" he asked quietly. I nodded, but neither of us said more. Some truths were too fragile to speak aloud. Hiroshima wasn't just destroyed. It had become something caught between existence and memory. Part graveyard, part echo. We weren't just occupying a fallen city. We were trespassing on a wound. We thought surviving the war meant the nightmare was over. Standing there though, with that phantom ringing in my ears and the air thick with dust that shimmered like bone, I realized the war had simply changed shape, and we were about to fight something we couldn't aim at. The first time we stepped into Hiroshima, it didn't feel like walking into a city at all. It felt like entering the aftermath of some divine punishment. I'd seen burned villages in the Pacific, seen towns flattened under artillery, but this was different. This wasn't ruin, it was hollowing. The soul of the place had been stooped clean out, leaving only the skin behind. We marched in narrow columns, our boots grinding over a floor made of ground glass and powdered stone. The air clung heavy, ash and iron mixed until you could taste it in your teeth. Even with a rag tied across your mouth, it got in. The city was a tomb, and we were the ghosts intruding on the dead. Our orders were simple on paper: assess, secure, occupy. But how do you occupy a place where time has already stopped? There were no civilians to corral, no enemies to flush from corners, just the absence of both. We carried rifles because that's what soldiers do, but every man knew there was nothing left here to fight, at least, nothing living. We were 5 in the squad. Daniels, my shadow since training days, walked to my left. He had that crooked grin that outlived most bad days. Ruiz, our radio man, small and built like a barrel, eyes always calculating exits. Torres, still green, a farm boy with hands too big for his weapon. And Sergeant Jackson, the kind of leader whose silence hit harder than shouting. He didn't waste words. Every order came sharp and final, like a door closing. These men were the only thread tying me to the real world, because around us, reality itself felt unsteady. We did find survivors, though, not in any way that brought relief. Scattered figures, burned beyond recognition, wandered like their bodies hadn't yet accepted they should stop. Some sat among the wreckage, staring at nothing, their minds stranded somewhere far beyond reach. I remember a woman cradling a limp child, crooning a tune too cracked to carry. Daniels crouched to help, but she hissed, baring teeth, daring him to touch what little she had left. We walked on. There was nothing else to do. The ones who lived carried an aura I still can't name, half here, half elsewhere, as though the blast had burned away more than flesh. The left was radiation, the left was underaged, the right was seized, ethics and balls. We set up in what had once been a school. The roof was torn open to the stars, chalkboards shattered, dust thick as fog, but the walls still stood. We unrolled our bedrolls across the warped floor, rifles propped by the door, pretending that counted as safe. It didn't, because at night, the city moved, not with wind or footsteps, but with sound, low and restless, as if the ruins themselves were breathing. Sometimes it was a groan under the floorboards, sometimes faint voices drifting through the gaps. Jackson dismissed it as rats, though even he sounded unsure. Rats don't whisper your name. The first time it happened to me, I was on perimeter watch. The moon hung pale, ghosting over the courtyard. My rifle felt heavier than usual, the air brittle cold. Then I heard it, a woman's voice calling softly from the direction of the collapsed gymnasium. She said my name, not my last name, the way the army uses you, but my first, the one I hadn't heard since my mother's kitchen. It stopped me cold. I almost stepped forward, almost. Then it cut off, sudden and final, as if someone had snapped the cord of a radio. I stood there shaking, staring into the dark, until dawn. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't have to. When Ruiz met my eyes at breakfast, I saw it. He'd heard something too. 3 days later, we pushed deeper into the city. Hiroshima Castle was nothing but bones. Bridges melted into the river, towers twisted like wax. Then we found what remained of a church. The building was gone, but the bell tower stood, cracked, defiant, leaning against a sky that refused color. As we approached, the air cooled, sharp enough to bite. Torres lifted a finger. Listen, the bell rang, faint, distant, but clear. Yet no wind stirred, no rope swung. We froze, every man locked in the same disbelief. When the sound faded, Jackson spat, jaw tight. Keep moving. We did. But that night, every one of us dreamed of that bell. None of us spoke of it, but Ruiz prayed louder. Torres shook, and Daniel's grin finally disappeared. By the end of that first week, the cracks in us had begun to show. We'd fought through jungles, shell fire, ambushes, but nothing prepared us for this. Hiroshima wasn't an assignment anymore. It was something feeding on us, testing the edges of our sanity. One night, Daniels broke the silence. You ever think we're not supposed to be here? I looked up from my canteen. What do you mean? He gestured toward the window, where the city glowed faint under the moon. All this, what happened here, it wasn't meant for men to walk in afterward. Maybe this place belongs to someone else now. No one argued. We just listened to the wind drag through the empty halls. And somewhere far off, as if agreeing, the bell rang again. The longer we stayed, the more the city seemed to wake beneath our boots. At first, we told ourselves it was exhaustion, nerves stretched too thin after too many campaigns. But soon, the air itself began to feel sentient. Every corner watched. Every gust of wind carried whispers that didn't belong to the living. Hiroshima wasn't a ruin anymore. It was a wound refusing to close, and we were standing in its open mouth. Command called it a stabilization patrol. On paper, we were supposed to chart safe roads, check bridges, and report any surviving civilians. In truth, it felt more like mapping the organs of something that did want us inside it. We moved in tight formation, Jackson at the front, me and Daniels flanking him, Ruiz lugging the radio on his back, Torres bringing up the rear. Our rifles felt heavy, not from weight, but from uselessness. The streets swallowed sound. Every footstep returned warped, echoing back just half a beat too late, like someone or something was walking with us just out of sight. Don't break formation, Jackson would snap whenever one of us glanced over his shoulder. Easier said than done when your gut kept insisting there were 6 men in your squad instead of 5. The city was an echo chamber for ghosts. Once, under the collapsed roof of a marketplace, I caught sight of something that made my blood freeze. Small shapes, darting between stalls, quick, pale, soundless. Children, or the idea of children. Torres grabbed my arm. You see that? He whispered. I nodded. The shapes flickered again, weaving through the debris, like smoke caught in a draft. Survivors, Daniels muttered, his voice more hope than belief. We moved toward them, slow, rifles lowered. The closer we got, the colder it felt. When one of them stepped into the open, I realized it wasn't hope we were feeling. It was dread. She couldn't have been more than 7. Her skin was the color of ash, hair white as bone. Her eyes, Christ, her eyes looked hollowed out, black wells that caught no light. She held a cracked porcelain doll in her arms, its face burned smooth. For a moment, she just stared at us, unblinking. Torres spoke softly, lowering his weapon. It's okay, we're not gonna hurt you. She tilted her head in that slow, unnatural way that makes you think of marionettes. Then she turned and walked straight into a wall of collapsed brick. Not around it, through it. The wall didn't crumble, she simply vanished. Torres stumbled forward, jaw slack. Did you? Shut it, Jackson barked. His hand trembled around the rifle grip. Keep moving. None of us argued, but the image of that doll burned itself into my mind and never left. That night, we went to refill canteens at the river. The water crawled thick and dark, reflecting the faint orange of distant fires. We crouched along the bank, the silence broken only by the scrape of metal against rock. Daniels nudged me suddenly, his face pale. Look upstream, he whispered. I followed his gaze and saw a body drifting toward us, burned black, arms spread as though crucified by the current. Then another, then another. Within moments, the river was thick with them, dozens, maybe hundreds, men, women, children. Their faces were distorted, smooth as wax figures, the water polishing away every trace of who they'd been. Jesus Christ, Ruse whispered. No one spoke after that. We left the canteens where they were and backed away from the water. None of us drank that night. The days blowed together, patrols by day, nightmares by night. Ruiz started carrying his rosary everywhere, fingers never still. Torres twitched at every shadow. Even Daniels grew quiet, the easy humor that used to anchor us slipping away. He'd sit awake in the dark, cigarette ember pulsing like a tiny heartbeat. The fear didn't come in waves, it seeped, slow and patient, until it lived in us like a second pulse. The breaking point came during a meal. Cold rations, the taste of ash still thick in the air. Torres slammed his tin cup to the ground. This place is cursed, he hissed. His eyes darted to every corner as if expecting something to answer. We shouldn't be here. Nobody should. Quiet, Jackson warned. No, Torres snapped, voice cracking. I saw her, the girl. She walked through a goddamn wall. You saw it too. Silence. No one wanted to give him truth. Say something, he demanded. Daniels took a slow drag, exhaled smoke. We saw it. We just don't talk about it. Torres barked a bitter laugh. That's worse. Pretending it didn't happen doesn't make it go away. Jackson's fist hit the floor hard. Enough. We've got orders. We hold position until command says otherwise. You lose your head, you'll lose it alone. But I could tell, even Jackson didn't believe his own words anymore. That night, I took watch again. The ruins stretched endless, moonlight spilling over the bones of buildings. The air was still, too still. Then came the whispers. Not one voice, not even two, dozens, maybe more. They murmured in unison, too faint to form words, but close enough to feel their breath slide past my ear. My skin went ice cold. I turned, rifle raised. My thought listed the air. The time fractured, too still. Then movement, a ripple across the far side of the road. Figures stepped from the darkness. Men, women, children. Their bodies scorched and broken. Their faces half-formed. They moved without sound, gliding instead of walking. I froze. One turned toward me. Its eyes were hollow sockets, but I swear it saw me. The instinct to fire warred with the certainty that bullets wouldn't matter. I gripped the rifle so hard my hands ached. The figures drifted past, dissolving into the black. When Daniels came to relieve me, I couldn't speak. The next morning, Ruse tried to radio command. Unexplained movement, he said, voice trembling. Possible survivors in the ruins. Static filled the line, but he kept talking, desperate to anchor us to something official. Then the static warped, high, shrill, almost human. A scream trapped in wire. We all clamped hands over our ears. The sound cut out, leaving a silence that felt like a knife sliding between ribs. The radio never worked again. On the 10th night, we saw fire. Ruiz spotted it first, a flicker near the old dome. We moved closer, weapons drawn. In a courtyard surrounded by collapsed walls, a crowd had gathered, dozens of shapes swaying in the flames. Men, women, children, all blackened, all moving with eerie calm. The fire burned without smoke, fueled by debris, cloth, even bones. Their voices rose together in a low, throaty chant that rolled through the air like thunder. None of us breathed. Then one of them turned. Its face was melted smooth, jaw hanging open in imitation of song. Fall back, Jackson hissed. We obeyed. The chant followed us all the way back through the ruins, echoing in the walls, in our heads, even in our dreams. That night, Torres broke. He sobbed into his blanket, whispering, "They know we're here. They're calling for us." And for the first time, none of us could tell him he was wrong. By the end of that second week, the city had changed us in ways none of us wanted to name. The heat no longer felt like heat. It felt like something alive, breathing against your neck. Our bodies ached, our thoughts blurred, and the ruins seemed to bend subtly when we weren't looking. It was like Hiroshima had swallowed us whole, digesting us one dream at a time. Command still sent patrol orders, but it didn't matter. We were ghosts, wandering inside something that wasn't finished dying. Jackson pretended the routine kept us sane. Patrol, rest, ration, report. But there was no sanity left to maintain. Ruiz's prayers came in whispers that never fully stopped. Torres looked half-starved, though we all ate the same. Daniel's eyes had gone dull, not from fear, but from something deeper. Acceptance, maybe, like he already knew we weren't making it out. We kept walking the streets because stopping was worse. Every alley reeked of burnt metal and rain that never fell. Every window reflected us in ways that didn't match. Too many shapes, faces where there shouldn't be any. It got so bad I stopped glancing at glass altogether. One afternoon, the sky turned the color of old bone, and the light shifted, flat, gray, wrong. We were passing the shell of a post office when Torres froze mid-step. "Listen," he whispered. At first I thought it was wind, but then I heard it, the same hymn that had haunted our nights, faint and low, drifting through the wreckage. "Radio?" Ruiz murmured, but the receiver on his back was dead weight, wires curled like veins gone dry. The song came closer, surrounding us though there was no source. Jackson motioned us into cover behind a wall. We crouched there, breathing shallow, while that melody, if it even was one, moved through the ruins like smoke. It didn't sound human. It sounded like the city itself was remembering. When it finally faded, Torres was shaking. Daniels lit a cigarette with trembling hands. None of us spoke. That night the temperature dropped. The air in the schoolroom where we slept grew damp and heavy. My breath came in plumes I couldn't see. Somewhere outside, footsteps echoed, slow, deliberate, circling the building. I thought it was my imagination, until Torres bolted upright. "You hear that?" he whispered. We all did. The steps paused right outside the door, then resumed, scraping against debris, measured, patient. I gripped my rifle tight enough to make my knuckles ache. The sum stopped. Then came the humming, soft, female, the same tune as before, the same pitch, the same unbearable calm. It pressed against the walls like a tide. Ruiz muttered a prayer so fast it blurred into nonsense. The humming grew louder, closer, then cut off as suddenly as it began. We sat in silence until dawn, afraid to breathe. By morning, the school felt wrong. The walls leaned inward. The floor seemed to pulse beneath our boots. Jackson didn't wait for orders. "Pack up," he said. "We're moving." We didn't ask where. Anywhere was better than there. We moved through streets that looked half familiar, but not the same. Corners had shifted. Doorways appeared where none had been. It felt like walking through a city that dreamed itself differently every night. We found our way back to the hospital district, what was left of it. The main building stood gutted, ribs of concrete reaching for the sky. Burn marks streaked the outer walls, and the stench was unbearable. Inside, the air carried a sweetness that made me gag. It wasn't rot, it was chemical. Burned, disinfected, mixed with decay. We swept room by room, weapons raised. The sound of dripping water followed us, but every sink we passed was dry. Down one hallway, Torres pointed. A single door still hung intact. Strange, since every other one had been blasted off its hinges. "There," he said, voice thin. Jackson nodded, signaling us forward. Ruiz whispered a prayer under his breath. Jackson kicked the door open. What waited beyond killed every word in my throat. Rows of hospital beds lined the room. Neat, orderly, too neat for this place. Bodies lay on each one, shrouded in sheets that clung like wet paper. At first I thought they were corpses until I saw the rise and fall of their chests. Shallow, mechanical, like something breathing for them. One by one their eyes opened, blank, molten, reflecting light that wasn't there. Daniel stumbled back, muttering, "Jesus." Ruiz crossed himself so fast his rosary snapped. Jackson didn't say a word. He just stepped back, shutting the door without turning his back on them. We left the hospital and didn't speak again until the sun started bleeding down the horizon. That night, Ruiz finally broke. He sat against a wall, rosary clenched so tight his knuckles bled. "They're not alive," he said quietly. "Not the way we are." Daniels frowned. "What are you saying?" Ruiz's eyes glistened in the dying light. "They're caught, between life and death, between the bomb and what comes after. The blast burned them into the world's seams. They can't move on." Silence. He looked at each of us in turn. "That's why we hear them. That's why they sing." His voice cracked on the last word. No one laughed. No one even breathed. Because deep down, we all knew. It explained more than anything else had. When morning came, Daniels was gone. His bedroll lay folded, his rifle leaning untouched against the wall. Jackson cursed, scanning the courtyard. "He wouldn't just leave," I said, though part of me knew better. Hours passed as we searched the ruins, calling his name until our throats were raw. Finally, Torres found something, a line of blueprints leading toward the old church ruins. They ended at the bell tower. We approached in silence. The air there was cold, colder than the wind. Inside, hanging from the bell rope, were Daniel's dog tags, swaying gently as if moved by invisible hands. The bell itself hung still, cracked and blackened. Jackson stepped forward, his face hard, unreadable. He reached out, stopped, then drew his hand back. No one spoke. Then the bell rang, once, sharp, deafening.
We said this moment, I was real blinded and make faster and showed headlong. Would you want a deal?
Jackson stared into the dark for a long time before speaking. We're pulling out, he said. Ruiz lifted his head. We can't. Command. Command doesn't know what's here, Jackson snapped. And they wouldn't believe us if they did. He looked at us one by one. We leave at dawn. That's an order. It should have felt like relief, but none of us believed the city would let us go. Just before dawn, I woke to the sound of footsteps circling our shelter. Slow, familiar, measured. The humming followed. That same hymn-turned lullaby, brushing soft against the walls. I held my breath, staring into the dark. Then it stopped, leaving only silence and the faint taste of copper in the air. When we stepped outside at first light, fresh boot prints waited in the dust. Too fresh, too exact. They matched Daniel's size, leading back toward the ruins. We had a choice. Follow them and risk everything, or leave him behind. Jackson's eyes flicked toward me, searching for an answer I didn't have. That's when I realized it didn't matter. Hiroshima wasn't done with us. We weren't leaving. Not yet. We followed the footprints because leaving Daniels behind would have been the same as leaving ourselves. He wasn't just a soldier to us. He was the reason we still felt human. And even if every instinct screamed to turn back, duty outweighed reason. The sun rose pale over the ruins. Its light fanned and washed out like it had bled through smoke. Ash drifted through the air, soft as snow. The prints cut a perfect line through the dust, heading deeper into the dead heart of Hiroshima. Jackson didn't say a word. He just adjusted his rifle strap and started walking. Ruiz checked his radio out of habit, even though it hadn't made a sound in days, then made the sign of the cross. Torres fell in behind me, eyes wide, jaw tight. None of us spoke. The city around us seemed to listen, each step stirring echoes that didn't belong to us. We passed through streets where the wreckage twisted in impossible ways. Steel beams melted into arcs, walls fused with glass. It looked like the city had been caught mid-breath and never exhaled. The further we followed, the stranger it became. Geometry itself began to fail. Roads that once ran straight bent like whooped metal. Doorways appeared where there should have been walls. Whole buildings seemed to shift subtly when you blinked. The footprints stayed steady though, one man's steps marching onward, as if guided by something neither alive nor dead. The tracks led past the burned-out hospital, then turned sharply toward a narrow side street half buried in debris. The air grew colder. A faint hum trembled under the surface of the world, too low to hear but heavy enough to feel in the teeth. Shelter, Ruiz murmured, pointing to faded Japanese characters above the recessed door in the concrete. An air raid bunker, sealed tight. Jackson gripped the handle, muzzle straining until the lock cracked open with a dry bark. A rush of cold air swept up from the darkness below. It wasn't natural cold. It carried weight, like stepping into the breath of something ancient. Flashlights cut narrow cones through the black. The stairs dropped farther than they should have, twisting deeper with every turn. The walls were slick with moisture, streaked with soot and what looked like handprints. Hundreds of them, some small as children's, others dragging down the concrete in long smears. Keep formation, Jackson ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. We moved slowly, boots echoing off the steps, each sound returning a second too late. When we reached the bottom, the corridor stretched out before us. Low ceilings, rotted timbers, the air thick with mold and iron. My tongue went numb from the taste of it. Daniel's footprints continued straight through the dust. Near the first junction, Ruiz stopped and bent down, picking up a cigarette butt, half-smoked, crushed flat. Lucky strike, he muttered, his brand. The smell of tobacco lingered faintly, like something left behind only minutes ago. The deeper we went, the more the air thinned. The hum became rhythm, like distant chanting filtered through stone. Then came the sound of water, not dripping, lapping, slow and steady, as if something breathed beneath the surface. We turned a corner, and the passage opened into a chamber paneled in cracked concrete. Benches lined the walls. A shallow pool filled the center, black as mercury. Hold, Jackson said softly. The beam from Ruiz's flashlight swept across the water, and something glinted below. A child's shoe, small and black, with a tiny bell stitched into the strap. It rang once, faint but clear, even though the water didn't ripple. Ruiz staggered back, muttering a prayer. None of us dared move. Then the bell rang again, closer this time, like the sound itself was swimming upward. We backed away slowly and continued down the next corridor. The hymn returned, always the same, yet never the same. A single melody bending into different forms, sometimes soothing, sometimes unbearable, always present. It rose and fell with our breathing, adjusting its rhythm to match our steps. I could feel it vibrating in my bones. The walls closed tighter around us, our flashlights barely cutting through the black. We passed a side room where shadows clung to the walls, shaped like people sitting along benches. Our lights cast our silhouettes over them, but theirs didn't move. Only once did one of those fixed shapes turn its head, just slightly, toward Torres as he stumbled. He recoiled with a sharp breath, pressing his palm against his chest. We kept moving until we reached a door of solid steel. Its wheel handle was fused with rust, scorched black from the blast. The boot prints stopped at its base, then continued faintly through a hairline crack along the frame, as if Daniels had stepped straight through solid metal. Jackson gritted his teeth and spun the wheel. It resisted, then groaned open, the noise scraping through the air like a scream trapped in iron. Beyond lay another room, long and narrow, lined with cots, blankets folded neatly, numbers chalked on the far wall. Someone had kept count here, even after the world ended. Ruiz touched the chalkboard, running his fingers over the names carved in a language none of us could read. He whispered another prayer under his breath, the kind that sounds like apology. Then, movement flickered in the dark. A figure stepped into the edge of our light, a woman in a tattered nurse's uniform. Her white coat burned brown at the edges. Her face was half gone, features blurred by heat, yet her eyes were calm, almost gentle. She lifted a hand, finger pressed to her lips, the universal gesture for silence. Behind her, the bodies on the cot stirred, not rising, not turning, just quivering faintly, like smoke disturbed by wind. The nurse tilted her head, nodded to us once, and then walked forward, straight through the wall. We stood there paralyzed. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might echo. Finally, Jackson spoke, voice raw. "Keep moving. Stay on the prince." We did, but our lights shook. The hymn grew louder again, more voices joining, more tones weaving through the dark. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was pressure, pushing from every side, filling our lungs until we could barely breathe. The tunnel sloped downward again, spiraling into what looked like a sub-basement. The walls gleamed black, melted smooth in spots, as if fire had tried to turn stone into glass. The smell changed, sickly sweet, like sugar burning. At the bottom waited a vaulted chamber, low-ceilinged and circular. In its center lay a massive bronze bell, cracked clean down the side, half buried in ash. A frayed rope dangled from the hole at its crown, cut sharply at the end. Then I saw him. Daniel stood on the far side of the bell. His face was calm, almost serene, like the war had finally let go of him. But the light didn't touch him right. His uniform looked wet without being wet. His boots left prints that didn't fill with water. "Danny," I said softly. He turned his head. His eyes were the same, but not. "Under it," he said. His voice wasn't sound. It vibrated in my chest, like it had bypassed air entirely. "They're under it." "Who?" Torres asked, trembling. "All of them," Daniels whispered. "The ones who sang, the ones who waited. They want someone to ring what they can't." The bell shuddered faintly, dust falling from its edge. The hymn pulsed in the air around us. Jackson reached for Daniel's shoulder, but his hand passed straight through, his skin frosting white from the cold. He stumbled back with a hiss. I wanted to ask what we were supposed to do, but the words twisted on my tongue before I could form them. Daniels looked at us one last time, eyes full of something like peace and sorrow entwined. "They want the fire answered with light," he said. "They want to be remembered by men who still count the living." Then he was gone. We left that chamber like men climbing out of a grave, but the darkness followed us up every step. None of us spoke. The only sound was our breathing, ragged, uneven, and the soft grind of boots on stone. The stairway back to the surface felt endless. The walls were lined with scratches, hundreds of tally marks carved by hands long turned to dust. I brushed one with my fingers as we passed. It was warm. Not the warmth of friction or touch, something alive beneath it, pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat trapped in stone. When we finally broke into daylight, the sky above Hiroshima was blinding white. The city lay silent, its ruins shimmering in the heat. And there it was, the dome. The same broken crown we had seen from afar since the first day. Its ribs jutted toward the sky like the bones of something enormous buried upright. The air around it shimmered. "They want the bell," Jackson said quietly. It wasn't an order this time. It was a truth he couldn't deny. Ruiz wiped his face with a shaking hand and nodded. "Then we ring it," he murmured. "For them." None of us argued. We were past that point. Torres swallowed hard, clutching his rifle. "What if they don't want us to?" Ruiz's eyes flicked toward him, hollow but steady. "Then they'll try to stop us, but they'll try to keep us too. It's not the same thing." We started toward the dome. The streets narrowed, closing in on us like ribs of a cage. The air thickened, heat rolling in waves that felt unnatural, pressing from every direction. Ash fell from the sky, soft and constant. Faces appeared in soot-streaked windows, fleeting, watching, gone again. A dog barked somewhere far away, and the echo bounced back from a place where no animal could have survived. The closer we got, the louder the hum beneath the city became. It was the hymn again, but it had changed, deeper now, layered, hundreds of voices rising and falling like breath. The dome loomed above us, its silhouette cutting across the pale horizon. The ground vibrated faintly underfoot. "Stay close," Jackson said. His voice sounded strange, farther away than it should have been. We reached the base and stopped. Shadows gathered in the broken entrance. Human shapes burned into the ground, stretching long and thin. I could feel eyes on me from everywhere and nowhere. The hymn swelled, filling my chest until I couldn't breathe. "Move," Jackson said again, and we stepped into the heart of Hiroshima. Inside the dome, the air was suffocating. Heat pressed down from nowhere, rippling through the dust. Ash coated the floor, thick enough to swallow our boots. The fractured ceiling let in thin beams of light that sliced through the gloom. In the center of the room stood the bell, massive, cracked down its side, metal warped from heat. It should have been silent, dead, but it pulsed faintly, a heartbeat of sound just beyond hearing. The footprints we had followed ended here, Daniel's footprints. They circled the bell once, then stopped in front of it, like he'd been waiting. Then the fire came. It began as a shimmer above the bell, faint at first, then blooming upward into white-blue flame. It burned without smoke or fuel, swirling in perfect silence. The hymn grew louder, transforming into a chorus of human voices. Men, women, children, all rising together in desperate harmony. Ruiz fell to his knees, clutching his rosary. "They want it rung," he gasped. "They need someone living to carry their names." Torres shook his head violently. "No, they want us. That's why they took Daniel's." The bell shuddered, the crack glowing molten red. The heat drove tears from my eyes. Shadows poured from the walls. Dozens, then hundreds, burned faces, empty sockets, twisted bodies stepping out of the firelight. They formed a ring around us, watching, not attacking, just waiting. Jackson's jaw tightened. "We finish it," he said. He stepped forward, wrapping his hands around the blackened rope. For a moment, he didn't move. He just looked at the bell, like he was seeing more than metal, like he was staring straight into the heart of everything we'd done. Then he pulled. The sound that followed wasn't metal striking metal. It was memory, an explosion of sound and light and human voices folded into one note that shook the city to its bones. The crack glowed white-hot. The fire around us rose in a spiral, twisting into the shapes of people. Soldiers, mothers, children, burned but whole. Faces turned upward as if waiting for release. The shadows joined them, merging into flame until the entire dome blazed with light. I dropped to my knees. Ruiz was shouting prayers, voice breaking. Torres fired his rifle into the fire, the bullets vanishing like pebbles thrown into the ocean. Jackson pulled again, the bell crying out a second time. Louder, longer, the sound ripping through everything. The city, the air, us. I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the roar. The hymn rose into something almost beautiful. The light became unbearable, and then it happened. For one impossible instant, the dome wasn't ruins. It stood whole again, clean, alive, sunlight glinting off fresh stone. The city outside bustled with life. People walked, laughed, shouted. Children ran through streets lined with paper lanterns. Then the sky turned white. The light swallowed everything. I felt the blast, the heat, the tearing away of flesh. The instant when life ended and something else began. It wasn't a vision, it was memory. The city's memory. The ghosts had shown us what they saw. When I opened my eyes again, I was on the ground, gasping for air. The bell stood silent. The flames were gone. The shadows were gone. Only the sound of wind moved through the dome. Ruiz knelt beside me, sobbing. Torres stared blankly, lips moving without sound. Jackson stood motionless, his hands blackened, his face streaked with ash. The silence that followed was absolute. Somewhere in that silence, I heard Daniel's voice one last time. "Thank you." We left the dome like men walking out of a funeral. We had no right to attend. The sky above was no longer white. It was ordinary sunlight, soft and golden, washing over ash and silence. Yet everything felt altered, as though the air itself had been holding its breath and had finally exhaled. The ruins still smoked. The ribs of the dome still cut the horizon, but the weight pressing on our chests had eased. The city was quiet now, truly quiet, not the suffocating stillness of before, but the kind that comes when something has finally been put to rest. None of us spoke as we moved through the streets. Our boats left faint prints in the dust, trailing behind us like a ledger of ghosts. At the second intersection, Jackson stopped. He looked back over his shoulder, scanning the street with that same cautious instinct that had saved our lives more times than I could count. Nothing moved. Ruiz tucked his rosary into his pocket, his hands still shaking. Torres walked close behind me, silent, eyes down. He didn't want to look at the buildings anymore, and neither did I. When we reached the school, the place that had been our shelter, the door we barricaded all week, was open. Jackson raised a hand, signaling us forward. We cleared the rooms, one by one, rifles ready, though none of us expected to find anything alive. The desks and cots were where we'd left them. The smell of burned chalk still hung faintly in the air. Then Ruiz froze. "Sir," he whispered. On the blackboard, someone had drawn a circle in the dust with a finger. Inside it, a single cross mark. It took me a moment to understand. Roll call. One mark for one man. I looked toward my bedroll, and there, resting neatly on the folded blanket, lay a set of dog tags. The chain looped carefully, not tossed. I didn't have to read the name. The weight alone told me. Daniels. My throat tightened. When I picked them up, the metal was warm, as if someone had been holding it moments before. I closed my fist around it, the edges biting into my palm. "Take an hour," Jackson said quietly. "Then we move." We repacked our gear, checked weapons, more out of habit than purpose. The radio was still dead, but Ruiz slung it over his shoulder anyway. Weaving it behind would have felt like abandoning another man. As we stepped out, I glanced back once more at the schoolhouse. The chalk circle still gleamed faintly on the board. One mark inside it, one accounted for. We followed the same streets we patrolled for weeks, but now they looked different, emptier, gentler somehow. The marketplace where we'd seen the children's figures was silent. The church tower stood black against the horizon, cracked but still upright. The river ran slow and dark, carrying debris like broken memories drifting toward the sea. At the corner near the collapsed tram line, we saw movement that stopped us cold. A woman in a soot-stained coat knelt by the roadside, washing a child's face with water from a dented tin bowl. The boy's eyes were too old for his small face, but they weren't empty, they were living. The woman looked up at us. She didn't speak. She just dipped the rag again and continued wiping the boy's cheek. Jackson crouched, reached into his kit, and pulled out the last unopened field dressing. He placed it near her feet, stepped back, and nodded. She didn't thank him, didn't smile, didn't show fear. She just met his gaze, then returned to her work, like the simple act of tending to her child was the only defiance the dead world required. That moment, small, quiet, felt more sacred than any prayer. We kept walking. The road to the outer checkpoint was long and flat. The sky above it looked scrubbed clean, the kind of blue you only notice after months of gray. We moved in a line, shadow stretching fen across the road. Twice, heat ripples shimmered ahead where there should have been none. Once, faintly, we heard a bicycle bell ring in the distance. A normal sound, almost human, but it made every one of us flinch. At the checkpoint, the sentry barely recognized us. His eyes went wide as we approached, dust and ash clinging to our uniforms like a second skin. "Where's your fifth?" he asked. Jackson didn't hesitate. "Missing," he said. The word landed like a stone. The sentry studied us for a moment, then gestured toward the camp beyond. "You boys look like you could use a medic." He wasn't wrong. The truck that carried us rattled like bones. Every bump felt like it might shatter what little calm we had left. When we reached base, the familiar smells hit hard. Fuel, coffee, hot canvas, the sharp taint of metal and sweat. Civilization, but it didn't feel like home anymore. They sat us down in the medical tent, shining lights in our eyes, checking pulses, writing notes that couldn't begin to explain what had happened. "Nausea?" the doctor asked. "Headaches? Winging in the ears?" We nodded at all the right times. He pressed his thumb against my arm, watching the blood return to the skin. "Exposure," he muttered. "You're lucky." Lucky. That word landed hollow. The officer running debrief wore a clean uniform and a face untouched by ash. He asked about routes, supply caches, surviving civilians. He never mentioned the dome, or the bell, or the voices. "Any unusual phenomena?" he asked finally. Jackson didn't flinch. "Heat distortions, unstable structures, civilians in shock." The officer nodded, pen scratching neat lines across the paper. "Submit written reports by morning." Then he dismissed us, like we were any other unit returning from any other mission. That night, we washed the ash from our skin. The water ran gray, then clear. Torres sat on his cot afterward, staring at his hands as if they didn't belong to him. Ruiz lay flat, rosary clasped to his chest, whispering softly in Spanish until sleep took him. Jackson sat apart, elbows on his knees, staring at nothing. I lay awake listening to the hum of generators outside, the crackle of distant radios. For the first time in weeks, there were no whispers, no hymns, just silence. But even that silence carried weight, the kind that follows something holy or terrible, or both. The days that followed blurred into the kind of silence soldiers never talk about, the kind that doesn't end when the shooting stops. They reassigned us to logistics, far from the ruins, far from anything that still burned. We loaded crates, counted rations, pretended the world had returned to order, but it hadn't. The city stayed in us. It lived under our skin, a hum beneath the bones. Ruiz got his radio repaired, though it never sounded the same. Static filled every gap between words, like the air itself remembered what it had heard. Torres started sketching maps in a small notebook, every supply depot, every crate number, like naming things could keep him from getting lost again. Jackson spoke softer now, but his eyes never stopped scanning the horizon. He carried something in his pocket and touched it before every order. Maybe a cross, maybe the tags of the men we'd left behind. One evening, we walked to the edge of the camp where the fences met the open plain. The sun hung low, orange and heavy, turning the metal wire into gold. Beyond it, the skeletal outline of Hiroshima still rose in the haze. It looked smaller from here, but not less alive. Wind swept through, carrying the faint clink of shell casings someone had tied to a string. They rattled together like a wind chime, sharp and fragile, making a melody that felt too deliberate. We stood there until the light died. For a moment, I could almost believe that sound was the city breathing again. When we returned to our tent, I found the dog tags still warm against my chest. I'd kept them close since the day we found them on the bedroll. I told myself it was respect, but deep down I knew it was something else. The weight anchored me, proof that part of us still belonged there, in that dome, among those voices. I said the names quietly sometimes. Daniels, Ruiz, Torres, Jackson, mine. Then one more, the one we never learned, the one that belonged to all of them. The nameless dead. Witness, I whispered, because that was the only word that still felt true. The next morning, Jackson came to my cot. He didn't knock or clear his throat. He just sat down, elbows on his knees, staring at the dirt like he was reading something written there. They'll want reports, he said finally. They'll want details that fit on paper, but there are things we'll carry that don't fit anywhere. I nodded. He stood to leave, then paused. When they ask what happened in that city, tell them what a soldier can tell. But remember their names, even if no one else does. He didn't wait for an answer. He just walked out into the sunlight, a shadow among shadows. We shipped out that afternoon. The truck rattled down the dirt road, and then the side mirror, the dome shrank behind us until it was just a smudge against the horizon. Then it vanished. I thought that would be the end of it, that leaving would mean freedom. But the truth was simpler and far crueler. You don't leave Hiroshima, you just carry it somewhere else. It rode with us in our gear, in the gray dust that clung to every scene. It stayed in how we slept too close to one another, how we jumped at sudden sounds, how Ruiz paused before every prayer like he was waiting for permission. It stayed in Torres's silence, in Jackson's haunted stillness, and in me most of all, in the way I started hearing that faint hum again whenever the world grew too quiet. Years passed, but the sound never did. People like to say time heals, but they've never heard a bell that doesn't stop ringing. I did. Sometimes, when sleep wouldn't come, I'd hear it again, soft, distant, like wind moving through the ribs of an empty church. Not the bell of a building, but the one inside my chest. The same note that echoed the day Jackson pulled the rope. The same tone that carried through fire and ash and silence. It would start as a hum, then swell, a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I'd lie there, eyes open, waiting for it to fade. It never did. I learned to live with it. You have to. You tell yourself it was radiation, exhaustion, hallucination. You pretend survival means escape. But some nights, when the world goes still, I hear the faint toll drift across the distance, and I know I'm back there again. Ash to my ankles, shadows watching, the sky burning white. Sometimes I dream of Daniels. He never looks afraid. He never speaks. He just smiles, that same sad smile he gave us in the sub-basement when he pointed at the bell. I wake with his words in my head, the ones he left behind in the dark. They want to be remembered. That's the part that haunts me. Not the ghosts, not the fire, not even the moment the world ended in light. It's the remembering. The weight of all those names we never learned, all those lives burned into the seams of the earth. The world moved on, built new cities over old bones, pretended it had healed, but I know better. I was there when the dead sang their own requiem. I was there when fire became memory. So when people ask what happened in Hiroshima, I don't tell them about radiation or strategy or surrender. I tell them about the bell. I tell them about the song that still vibrates beneath the ground, waiting for someone to listen. I tell them that survival isn't freedom. Survival is witness. Survival is the sound that never fades, the hymn that waits for you in the silence. And when my time comes, when the last breath leaves me, I know what I'll hear. Not pace, not quiet, the bell, the hymn rising again, calling me home. That's what they never told you about Hiroshima. The fire didn't end the war, it kept burning, inside the men who walked its ruins. I'm Captain Rebel, and I've seen what happens when history tries to bury its own ghosts. If you felt the weight of this story, if the silence stayed with you, then stand with me. Hit subscribe, join the watch, keep the lights low, because next time, we're going deeper. The next story's already on the horizon. Another classified operation, another truth buried in the dark. Until then, keep your eyes open, your rifle clean, and your faith in what you heard. This is Captain Rebel, signing off.